Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today's lecture covers the 1980s in the European integration. Your required readings include chapters 11 and 12. Chapter 11 entitled The European Community into the 1980s. Chapter 12 covers the Single European Act. This lecture is structured into the following sections. The first section gives you a quick recap of what we have learned so far in the 1970s of the European in the European integration. The second section reviews the main institutional and integrated developments took place in the 1980s and gave or relaunched the European integration in that period. The third section addresses the main problem experienced by the European community in the 1980s, which was related to the British question. The fourth section would review the whole period of the 1980s in the European integration through questions and answers. The fifth section would address your research project. We studied the 1970s in the history of the European integration, and we learned that we have different views on that period. Many suggested that European integration was dead in the water in the 1970s. Others perceived the whole period, the 1970s, as dark ages or decimal decade in the evolution of the European integration. We concluded that the best, the best to say about the 1970s is that the 1970s was a transitional period between the launch of the European integration in the 1960s and and relaunching the European integration in the 1980s. The 1960s witnessed launching the European integration. You know, we studied the Rome treaties and the merger treaties. The 1980s, I mean, the main characteristic of the 1980s was relaunching the European integration. And this is the best to say about the 1980s. How come? Because the 1980s experienced major institutional and integrated developments in the European integration. Right? Let's first review the main institutional developments that took place in the 1980s. The first the first institutional or the first such institutional developments were introduced by the President of the European Commission, Roy Jenkins. He became the President of the European Commission in 1977 till 1981. He introduced institutional reforms to the EC. These reforms were called the Jenkins reforms. First of all, Roy Jenkins attempt to strengthen the role of the European Commission in the EC, he proposed that the European Commission or the President of the European Commission should attend economic summits or international economic summits before becoming a president of the European Commission. Only major, major member states of the European Community used to attend the international economic summits like G8, like GATT. Here, President Jenkins, the President of the European Commission, insisted that the European Commission should be or should attend the international economic summits so that small states or small member states of the EC would be represented in these summits and not feel like they are alienated. So his proposal was supported by small states or small member states of the European Commission, and he himself was the first president of the European Commission to attend a G8 summit on behalf of the community. In addition to strengthening the role of the European Commission, James introduced internal reforms on the problem of the bureaucratization of the Commission. I mean, the European Commission suffered from that problem, bureaucratization. So once he took office in 1977, he appointed a committee to review the internal workings of the Commission. That committee prepared a report that displayed the many bureaucratization, the many and different bureaucratization problems that the European Commission suffered from, including, for example, lack of active coordination within the Commission, excessive number of administrative units inside the Commission, poor allocation of staff, poor recruitment and promotion mechanisms within the committee, and the report also stressed the importance of administrative skills and management standards that must be adopted by the Commission. The report also proposed some solutions to these problems. All right, that report became a reference in the Commission's administrative reform history. So it was very important, right? And we reviewed the Jenkins reforms. The other type of institutional development took place in the 1980s were relating to strengthening the role of the European Parliament in the EC. The introduction of direct elections to the European Parliament in 1979 paved the way for strengthening or extracting new powers from member states than before to the European Parliament, right? So the European Parliament became in a much stronger position to extract new powers from the member states than before, because now its members are directly elected. why member states were hesitant to give or to grant the European Parliament more powers? Because, well, they said we cannot, or we couldn't do that because the members of the European Parliament were not directly elected by the European voters. Now, its members are directly elected, so the European Parliament was in a much stronger position to extract new powers from the member states than before. Also, institutional developments that took place in the 1980s include the Genscher-Colombo Plan for Institutional Reform of 1981. Genscher was the foreign minister of Germany. Colombo was the foreign minister of Italy, and both introduced, a set of institutional reforms um, to the EC. We will shed some light on the Genscher-Colombo plan in a minute. Also, institutional developments include the Spinelli proposal. Spinelli was an Italian politician and a senior member of the European Parliament, and he was a federalist. I mean, he was pro-supranational model for the European integration, and he introduced a specific proposal um, sought to diminish the institutional position of the European Council in favor of the European Parliament and Commission. Although both, neither the plan, I mean the Genscher-Colombo plan, nor the Spinelli proposal achieved much success at that time, but you know what? They paved the way for more institutional reforms within the EC. They paved the way for more powers to be given to the two institutions that represent supranational or supranationalism within the European integration, i.e. the Commission and Parliament. Also, institutional developments in the 1980s include um, institutional developments or institutional changes introduced by the Single European Act. The Single European Act was a treaty adopted by the 12 member states of the EC in the 1986 and came into force in 1987. Anyway, that treaty, the Single European Act, introduced some institutional changes relating to qualified majority voting, the establishment of the European Council, strengthening the role of the European Parliament, clarifying roles concerning implementing powers for the Commission and the Council. All right, so let's shed some light on these institutional changes introduced by the Single European Act of 1986. First of all, the introduction of qualified majority voting. In order to enable the creation of the single market by 1993, because the Single European Act aimed at establishing a single market or a common market within the EC by 1993. In order to achieve this goal, the Single European Act introduced an increased number of cases or issues where the Council, the European Council, could take decisions by a qualified majority rather than by unanimity. Unanimity or consensus was perceived as giving any member state of the EC the right to veto, the right to prevent any decision, right? So introducing some sort of qualified majority voting was perceived as a way to boost the European integration, to boost the decision making, especially within the European Council, the highest institution within the European construction. Also, the Single European Act of 1986 established the European Council, which formalized the conferences or summits of the heads of state or government, although the competencies or the responsibilities of the European Council were not specified until later in the Maastricht Treaty of 1991, which is best known as the Treaty on European Union. Yes, now the European Council, and this is due to the Single European Act, became a formal institution within the EC, right? But its responsibility were not specified. These responsibilities or competencies will be specified later in the Maastricht Treaty that was adopted in December of 1991 and came into force in 1993. Also, the Single European Act enhanced Parliament's powers by including the requirement for the European Parliament assent or approval when concluding enlargement and association agreements with new states. So if we accepted new members to the EC, or if we held an association agreement with a non-EC member, the European Parliament should approve this. Also, the Single European Act enforced or enhanced the legislative role of the European Parliament, thus paving the way towards Parliament's future role as co-legislator with the European Council of the European Union. Later on, with the entrance into force of the Maastricht Treaty in 1993, we will see how the European Parliament became a co-legislator of the European Union with the European Council, which is the highest authority or the highest institution in the European Union. In addition to that, the Single European Act clarified certain rules concerning implementing powers. For example, Um, um, it gives the Commission implementing powers for rules which the Council laid down. The Council could only reserve the right to exercise directly implementing powers in specific cases, right? These were the main institutional developments introduced by the Single European Act. In addition to those institutional developments, the European integration achieved major integrated developments in the 1980s on the widening and deepening fronts. You remember that widening and deepening were terms introduced by the Hague Summit of December 1969. The Hague Summit of 1969 aimed at widening and deepening the European integration. On the widening front, the European integration accepted three new member states: Greece, Spain, and Portugal, right? This is the second round of European enlargement, called the Southern enlargement. Greece was accepted as a full member of the EC in the 1981, Spain and Portugal in 1985. The three new member states share something in common. They experienced a period of dictatorship or authoritarian regime. With the fall of dictatorship in these countries, they applied or they transformed to some sort of representative or liberal democracy and applied for membership of the EC. Even though these three countries were not qualified at that time to be to be accepted as full members of the EC, the EC had to accept them for strategic reasons. And this explained by the Cold War factor, one more time, the impact of the Cold War on the European integration. The EC or the leaders of the EC concerned that these countries may or might uh, align itself with the Third World in the case of Portugal and with the Soviet Union in the case of Greece or Spain. And Spain, you know, occupies a very important strategic location for the defense of the West Europe. So they were accepted because of the Cold War developments, right? On the deepening front, we had two major developments in the 1980s. The first major development that boosted, that gave a major boost or a big boost to the European integration was the adoption and the entry into force of the Single European Act in 1987. The second was the evolution or the adoption of the European monetary system EMS as it goes, which paved the way for adopting a monetary union later on by the Maastricht Treaty. With regard to the European monetary system, the EMS, we studied the evolution of the European monetary system in the last lecture, and we since the Hague Summit of 1969 all the way to the establishment of the Eurozone of 19 member states. Uh, 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 so, I mean, I'm not going to repeat what we have studied, so far, but you have to put in mind that the developments on the European monetary system in the 1980s put the European integration on the path of economic and monetary union that was, established later in the 1990s with the end of the Cold War. Let's focus here on the most important integrated development took place in the 1980s, which was the Single European Act. The Single European Act, or SEA as it goes, sought to revise the treaties of Rome in order to add new momentum to European integration and to complete the internal market by January of 1993. Internal market means an area with no internal borders and in which there is free movement of goods, persons, services, and capital. Right? The Single European Act amended the rules governing the operation of the European institutions and expanded the powers of the European Community in a number of policy areas. By creating new community competencies and reforming the institutions, as we demonstrated, by explaining the different institutional changes introduced by the Single European Act. The Single European Act opened the way to further political integration and economic and monetary union that would be enshrined later in the Maastricht Treaty or the Treaty on European Union. You have many details on the significance of the adoption of the Single European Act in your reading, but I would like just to shed some more light in addition to institutional changes introduced by the Single European Act to the policy areas, the new policy areas that became under the Single European Act built by qualified majority. Under the Single European Act, qualified majority voting became the new norm in 4 of the existing areas covered by the treaties, I mean the treaties of the European integration. So the common customs tariff, free movement of capital, free movement of services, and maritime and air transport. All of these areas will be covered by qualified majority voting. The Single European Act introduced several new policy areas because the previous four were actually existing areas. New policy areas in which decisions would be taken by qualified majority. And this is, this was a major development because as we saw, since the Luxembourg compromise and since even the establishment of the European community, unanimity or consensus as a way of taking decision, you know what, delayed the much or the more important decisions in the European construction, because it enabled any state, any member state, to prevent the issuance of any decision, to exercise a veto power, right? So the Single European Act introduced several new policy areas in which decisions would be taken by qualified majority. These included internal market, economic and social cohesion, social policy, research and development, environment, common foreign policy, right? So these were, the new policy areas that will be in which decisions will be taken by qualified majority, right? Let's move to the a second or another positive development that took place in the 1980s, which were leadership changes in the European Community. The changes in the Commission presidency. Now we've got three presidents actually of the the European Commission during the 1980s. Roy Jenkins, he was the president of the European Commission during the period 1977 to 1981, and then followed by Gaston Thorn from 1981 to 1985, then Jacques Delors from 1985 to 1995. So changes in the Commission presidency coincide, now a new president of the European Commission, Gaston Thorn, and he was a federalist, and he was pro-European integration, coincided with the changes among the national leadership in France, Germany, and Germany. François Mitterrand became the president of France in 1981. Helmut Kohl became the chancellor of Germany in 1983, I think. Right? Anyway, Thorn was another president of the European Commission who gave boost to the European integration and who tried to reinforce or enhance the role of the European Commission as a supranational European institution in the EC. French President and Helmut Kohl were actually the architect of the Maastricht Treaty, which established the European Union and the euro currency. So leadership changes provided a platform for the relaunch of European integration in the 1980s. So now we talked about the major institutional and integrated developments took place in the 1980s and which provided a platform or which give gave the 1980s, its main characteristic, relaunching the European integration. Now to the main problem experienced by the European integration in the 1980s. It was a major problem, and it was related to the British question. You remember when we studied the British question as a case study, and I demonstrated that how Britain, in a way or another, was an obstacle to the European integration. I mean, not always, but I mean, it was often a major problem in the European integration, right? So in the 1980s, we've got a problem called the British budget rebate or the British budget refund. We will explain how come, from where this problem arose or emanate. But the thing is that we've got a problem here. The British leadership demanded that the European Union or the European community must refund Britain, right? Thatcher, which became a prime minister in 1979, adopted a confrontational and nationalistic tone, which caused disruption to the smooth operation of the EC. And she was very demanding. But unfortunately, by 1984, in the Fontainebleau summit, the British budget rebate problem was solved. So the Fontainebleau summit of 1984 marked a turning point in the European integration because it helped resolve the British budgetary question and opened the door for reform of the CAP or the Common Agriculture Policy. Now to the question answer section. The first question: what distinguished the European monetary system, EMS as it goes, from earlier attempts at economic and monetary union in 1971, which called the snake in the tunnel system or mechanism? A. It was more flexible, allowing a wider band for currency fluctuation or changes. B. It created a new currency unit which called the ECU. C. It provided a system of loans among the members. D. All the above. The right answer is all the above. The European Council agreed in 1978 to create the European Monetary System, EMS, as an attempt to revive monetary integration after the earlier failure of the European snake in the tunnel mechanism. However, the new EMS system was designed to be more flexible allowing a wider band for currency fluctuation. It also created a new currency unit, the echo, which was designed to be used as an international reserve currency. Question 2, as you see or write, yeah, the right answer is A, the collapse of dictatorship. Before Spain and Portugal submitted applications for membership of the European Community in 1977, dictatorships in both countries collapsed. Spain and Portugal began the transitional period to liberal or representative democracy. Spain and Portugal had applied for membership in the 1960s during authoritarian rule or during dictatorship, but these applications were rejected. After the fall, after Franco's death in Spain in 1975, Spain began a process of democratic transition. In 1977, it lodged its membership. It applied for EC membership. In 1976, Portugal completed its transition to parliamentary democracy and made a successful membership application in 1977. Although Italy and France were worried about the Spanish competition in agricultural goods, the EC approved the Spanish and Portuguese membership applications, and they joined the EC in 1986. Negotiation of the terms of accession is conducted after a country lodges an application for membership. Anyway, and I demonstrated to you how the Cold War development affected the EC decision of accepting the Greece, Spain, and Portugal as new members of the EC. This is question 3 is on the problem of the British budget rebate. And of course, the right answer is D, all the above. Because Britain per capita contribution to the budget in the 1970s were high for a number of reasons. First, Britain imported more goods, especially foodstuff, from outside the EC than did other member states of the EC. And therefore, Britain had to pay more in import levies or in import taxes to the EC. Second, low direct taxes in Britain meant that British consumers spent more in proportion to the relative wealth of the country, and Britain therefore contributed more to the budget in value added tax, VAT, as it goes, receipts. 3. Payments out of the budget were dominated by the Common Agricultural Policy, and Britain had a small and efficient farming sector that meant that it received less than states with larger agricultural economies, like, for example, France and Italy and even the Netherlands. So the thing is that Britain owed the European Union or the European community owed Britain, much amount of money. So Britain demanded that it had to get its money back. It is British money, for God's sake, according to Thatcher, which adopted a very aggressive confrontational and nationalistic tone when in handling this issue. Question 4, it is all about the presidency change or the presidency of the European Commission, who became Commission President in 1981. I just he was Gaston Thorn, and Gaston Thorn, he was a former Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister of Luxembourg, and became the President of the European Commission in 1981. He succeeded Roy James of Britain. Thorn held the post until 1985 when Jacques Delors became Commission President. Before becoming Commission President, Thorn was President of the United Nations General Assembly from 1975 to 1976. The member state widely supported Thorn's appointment as Commission President, and he was viewed as experienced and capable person. He had served as a member of the European Parliament and as both Foreign Minister and Prime Minister of Luxembourg, and while in these posts he chaired the Council of Foreign Ministers and the European Council. So his experience and his achievements actually qualified him and helped him in his mission of enhancing the role of the European Commission. Fifth question is all about the institutional reforms presented by the Genscher-Colombo plan, right? In the September 1981 plan for institutional reform of the European Community was known as the Genscher-Colombo plan. It was named after its sponsors, the German Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher and Italian Foreign Minister Emilio Colombo. The Genscher-Colombo plan proposed extending the EC's power into foreign policy and security matters. The plan also proposed institutional reforms, including increasing the powers of the European Parliament and extending qualified majority voting in an effort to limit the paralyzing impact of the national veto that had been introduced by the Luxembourg Compromise. Question number 6 is handling which institutional reform was necessary to implement the single market program, and the right answer would be A, qualified majority voting in the Council of Ministers. You remember, we've got two different institutions within the European construction, the European Council and the Council of Ministers. So now the Single European Act introduced qualified majority voting in the European Council, but forgot about the Council or didn't talk about decisions within the Council of Ministers. So qualified majority voting was designed to speed up decision making by reducing the number of areas in which individual states could reject progress by use of their veto. Qualified majority voting would apply to measures related to the freeing of the internal market, although certain measures, including the harmonization of indirect taxes and the removal of physical controls at borders, were excluded at British insistence. Again, the British question. in the evolution of the European integration. Without the extension of qualified majority voting, the internal market project was likely to be delayed and possibly lost through intergovernmental disputes. Because qualified voting or qualified majority voting support or boost the supranational approach to the European integration. The European Parliament had been directly elected since 1979. The Treaty of Maastricht created the three-pillar structure to provide for cooperation in foreign and security policy and justice and home affairs, not for completion of the single market. So the necessary institutional reform to implement the single market program was qualified majority voting in the Council of Ministers. Question 7 is true and false. The British government was opposed to the single market program, and this is actually, it was ironical because we saw how the British rule disrupted the process of European integration since the beginning, since we started the British question as a case study, right? But you know what? This is false. This statement is false. How come? Because the British government supported the single market program. It coincided with the belief of the British Prime Minister in universal free trade. I mean, the British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, believed in universal free trade. In a 1990 speech to the House of Commons, the British House of Commons, Margaret Thatcher described the single market as the most significant advance in the community since the Treaty of Rome, and gave the British government credit for having been the driving force toward the single market. For the British Conservative government led by Margaret Thatcher at that time, the single market represented a welcome move toward market liberalization. So here we've got irony here. Although we used to see how Britain as disrupting or putting obstacles, on the path of the European integration. Here, the British government, led by Margaret Thatcher, actually supported the adoption of the Single European Act. True or false? This is question number 8. The Single European Act completely transformed the aim of integration far beyond those in the Treaty of Rome. Actually, the right answer is false. This is a false statement. Why? While the Single European Act, adopted in February of 1986 and entered into force in July of 1987, did extend the aims of integration beyond those in the Treaty of Rome, they both had the same general goal. I mean, the Treaty of Rome and the Single European Act had the same general goal: creation of a common market. In this sense, the Single European Act was not a radical departure from the aims of the Treaty of Rome. The Single European Act brought changes to the treaties establishing the European communities and established European political cooperation, right? Once the Single European Act entered into force in 1987, The title European Parliament, which the Assembly had used since 1962, was made official. Now we've got the European Parliament. The Single European Act also increased the European Parliament's legislative power with the introduction of the cooperation and assent procedure. We talk about the assent procedure. I mean the European Parliament must agree on any kind or on any treaty of enlargement or association with no states. In addition to that, the Single European Act gave the pace of integration a huge boost in the mid-1980s, but it didn't radically alter the direction in which this integration took the EC. I mean, the direction was was leading toward establishing an internal market or a common market. The Single European Act expanded integration to include some new policy fields such as environment. It also introduced institutional reforms, including the introduction of qualified majority voting, as we just explained. Question number 9. Why did member states support the Single European Act? The right answer is A. It was seen as a way to revive economic growth. You remember the 1970s was a very hard period for the member states of the EC, witnessed the global economic downturn and two oil crises and everything. So member states supported the Single European Act because it was seen as a way to revive economic growth in Europe, which had remained sluggish through the 1970s and 1980s. The great demand for completing the single market came from governments and industry rather than from the general public in Europe. Removing the remaining barriers to trade came with adjustment costs for some of the EC's weaker economies, including Spain, Portugal, Greece, and Ireland. To address this, the Single European Act reformed the structural funds to make money available to these states to compensate them for their adjustment to the internal market. I mean, here we got new term, structural funds. Structural funds are aid provided by the European community in order to help weaker states or weaker economies within the EC, help them adjust to the internal market. This helped to secure their agreement on the trade. So everybody actually, even Britain, agreed to the treaty of the Single European Act because they thought it would boost or revive their economic growth. Question number 10. What hindered implementation of the single market? The right answer is C. Demands from compensation for adjustment costs by new member states. Again, structural funds. Because now weaker states or weaker new member states, especially Greece, Portugal, Spain, they demanded more structural funds. Implementation of the single market was hindered by demands made by some member states for compensation. to help them adjust to market liberalization reforms. While there was general acceptance of the of establishing a single market, some countries faced greater adjustment costs than others. The the less developed economies of the new member states of Southern Europe in particular feared the impact of increased competition. They demanded and received a substantial increase in structural fund payment from the European community intended to foster or to boost economic growth and development in the region. Neither bureaucratic weakness or the clarity of the treaty was a problem in implementing the single European or the internal market. Question number 11. What were the recommendations of the 1989 Delors report? You know what, we addressed this before when we studied the case study of the evolution of the European monetary system. All right. Before I forgot, the right answer for question number 11 is D, right? Anyway, let's speak for a minute here on your class project. I would like you to become experts in specific evolutive stage of the European integration. For example, the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1980s, the 1990s, or the first decade of the third millennium. So to be an expert in a specific stage in the evolution of the European integration, or to be an expert in one problematic issue raised by the evolution of the European integration. I am not demanding here. You must submit a research paper of 5 to 10 pages long. You may work individually, or you may work in group. So it is an individual or group assignment. It's up to you. I'm not demanding also in terms of sources. In addition to your textbook, two more sources are more than enough. So 3 references all in all, including including your 2 textbooks, right? You've got 2 textbooks here. With regard to the structure of your paper, the paper should consist of a research question and through analysis of your question. Your analysis should include not only facts and evidence, but also critical thinking in an effort to analyze the research question, right? You may choose one of the following topics for your individual or group research project. The first topic is the post-war context of European integration. Here, your research question may be something like that. What was the impact of the Cold War on the European integration? You may choose to write your research paper on the European integration in the 1950s. You know, the Marshall Plan and the Showman's Plan and the establishing of the ECSC. Your research question may be something like that. How the 1950s established the community model. You remember when we talked about three competing projects or approaches to the European integration. The first approach was the intergovernmental approach, supported by national governments, especially France and later Britain. The second approach was the supranational model or the federalist model, supported by federalist figures like, for example, we mentioned the Italian politician Spinelli and others. By the way, Spinelli is considered one of the founding fathers of the European integration. The third was the community model, which was something in between the intergovernmental model and the supranational or federalist model. So your question might be how the community model established in the 1950s. You may focus on the Rome Treaties of 1957 and how it gave the European community a huge boost, or the European integration a huge boost. You may focus on the 1970s and how it was a transitional period between the launch of the European integration in the 1960s and relaunching the European integration in the 1980s. Or you may actually argue for the counter argument, how the 1970s was a decimal decade or dark ages in the history of European integration. You may focus also on the 1980s in the evolution of the European integration and give some evidence on how this period launched the European integration. You may focus also on the end of the Cold War and the European integration. So your research question should be, or what was the impact of the end of the Cold War on the European integration. You may focus on the a specific treaty. We mentioned the Rome Treaties of 1957, or on the Single European Act of 1986, or the Maastricht Treaty that created the European Union of 1991 came into force in 1993, or you may focus on one of our studied case studies, the French factor in the European integration, the British question in the history of the European integration, and the evolution of European monetary integration. You may focus also on a round of European enlargement. The first round, the accession of Britain and others. The second or the southern round, and the post-Cold War enlargement of the European integration, or the post-Cold War round of enlargement. You may also choose to focus on Lisbon Treaty and how it was so significant in the evolution of the European integration. So you've got many topics to choose from. Just focus on one of these topics. All of these topics actually we are going to, and we studied or we are going to study. So you will be benefited twice from doing your research paper on one of these topics. For one thing, they are part of your course. Second, now you will complete your assignment, right? So you may work in group of twos or threes, or you may work individually. And the deadline of submitting your paper is April the 16th, or around April the 16th. Thank you for your listening.